Well, the good news is we're now halfway done with the Namco re-releases for the disc writer kiosks. The bad news is we're only halfway done. For those joining late because they really love Dig Dug, in 1990 Namco partnered with Nintendo and put a bunch of their old Famicom games in what were essentially Famicom Disk System vending machines. The disc writer kiosks where you'd bring your old floppies in, and for 500 yen have a new game written to them. Of course, by 1990, you could get those very early Famicom games for less than 500 yen. So Nintendo's push for these re-releases didn't really help extend the life of the disk system any. But let's look at this one, Dig Dug. One of Namco's classic arcade games, though these days it seems to have gotten overshadowed. Still, it was a massive hit for Namco at the time. And that time, of course, was 1982. The Famicom version was released in 1985, and as far as I've been able to tell, the only difference between that cartridge version and this Famicom Disk System version is the date on the title screen. I'm not sure why Namco was so obsessed with keeping those up to date, but at least you can tell that I'm playing the Disk System version. In Dig Dug, your goal is to kill all of the monsters on the screen. Do that, and then you go to the next stage, where your goal is to kill all of the monsters on the screen, and so on and so on. The distinctive thing in Dig Dug is that it all takes place underground, and initially there's only some very small pockets that are open. Your character, who is named Dig Dug, he won't be called Hori Taizo for about another 10 years, has the ability to drill through the soil, making new paths. Of course, drilling through the soil is slower than walking around through the open tunnels. Also, the music only plays while you're walking. If you stop and stand still, then it all cuts out. Dig Dug has two different ways to deal with the monsters that he encounters. The first is an air pump. Hit A or B and a hose shoots out, and it will stick into any enemy it comes into contact with. It gives them a burst of air and they inflate a little bit, and if you can pump them up 4 times, then they explode like a balloon. If you aren't mashing the buttons, or if you move after you've stuck them, then the hose comes out and they slowly deflate over time. Enemies that are partially inflated are stuck in place though, so it's very useful to give an enemy a couple of pumps if there's other ones closing in on you at the same time. There are 2 different kinds of enemies in Dig Dug. The Pukas, which are the red guys with goggles, and the Figars, the little dragons. The Pukas just move around, while the Figars can stop and blink for a second, then release a long jet of flame. As a general rule, enemies prefer to walk in open tunnels, but sometimes they'll just pass through the solid ground instead. The second way that Dig Dug can kill enemies is by dropping rocks on their heads. There's rocks randomly scattered around the stages, and when you undermine them, they fall down. Enemies will try to get out of the way of the rocks, but if you can squish them, then you get a lot of points. And squishing a group of enemies multiplies that. Ideally, you'd group everyone together and squish them with one rock, and that's how you'd get the most points. But that's definitely an easier said than done thing. It can help to use the pump to lock them in place below a rock that you're about to drop, though. Rocks always break when they fall, so you can't just drop it in a series of steps. Once it goes down, it's removed. When there's one enemy left, they realize that they're dead meat and take off running. If they manage to escape to the upper left hand of the stage, they'll get away, and you'll miss out on some points. There's one more way to get points, and that's the vegetables that appear in the middle of the stages. What type of vegetable changes as you progress through the game, and of course the vegetables you can collect later are worth a lot more. A useful thing to be aware of is that thin walls are often not really there. You'll have to slow down to dig through them, but you can shoot the air pump through them or drop the rock through them, and the Figar's flames can shoot right through them. There are 24 stages in this version of Dig Dug, and once you've cleared stage 24, the game essentially loops back to stage 13. Beyond that, it's just a matter of trying to run up your score. The original Famicom release of Dig Dug was really well regarded. It's a good port of a classic arcade game, and that continues forward to the Disk System version. The big difference between this and the arcade is that they've kind of squared up the stage a bit, shrunk it down vertically, but the structure still works just fine. I like Dig Dug a lot, but you probably want the cartridge rather than this disc. Since it was a very late release for just the disc writer, it can be kind of hard to get your hands on a floppy copy.